Hey everyone, Logan Hertz here with Hazeltine LLC, here with Peter Nelson. Peter, how are you?
Living the dream, Logan.
So I thought we'd talk a little bit about a theme that has come up time and again, which we could do a lot of content on, but we'll just briefly introduce the topic today. And that is the, sort of compliance departments, compliance bureaucracy that exists in the financial sector, which, like many other sectors of the economy, have a bureaucracy set up that is supposedly there to protect the consumer. Because we all know the consumer is too stupid to make his own decisions, and he needs to be protected from himself by these, selfless bureaucrats who, of course, are there just to help you, right? Right. Um, and so Peter and I and others, I think, who propose alternative financial solutions oftentimes get beat up, get on the wrong side of these bureaucracies because we're not exactly following their rules, right? So that means we must be evil people who are trying to mislead the public into taking their money out of Wall Street's jail, right? Into some other vehicles where they might actually have control over it, right, Peter?
Right. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So again, I mean, let's not be naive about this first and foremost. When people, it's funny because sometimes people will criticize you for being non-compliant, and I'm like, since when was being compliant a compliment? If someone tells you you're a compliant person, you're being compliant, does that sound like a compliment to you, Peter?
No, and then after going through the quote unquote pandemic that we did back in 2020, I'm not in the mood to be in compliant with that just about anything anymore.
Yeah. So, and again, I think the whole insulting premise to all of this, these rules and regulations, they're not laws, by the way. They're not laws according to St. Thomas Aquinas, if you follow his definition of what a law actually is. They are set up, as we all know, to protect the financial powers that be and to make it more difficult for financial professionals to give people advice that might take money away from Wall Street, right? And to grease the skids to make it as easy and as natural as possible for people to give their money over to Wall Street. Witness, as an example, the fact that in some companies, they take your money by default. Wall Street gets your money by default. You, by default, contribute, quote unquote, a portion of your paycheck to a 401k. And you
Yeah.
have to actually opt out. What a
I'll tell you a
great
funny
deal for
story
Wall
about
Street.
that. I got a
What
funny
a,
story about that I just thought of though.
yeah, go ahead, Peter.
I actually got defaulted, believe it or not, I got defaulted in an insurance company's 401k. Won't say the company. This happened like in the last year. Okay. So you're talking about defaulting just regular companies. Even insurance companies are now defaulting into 401ks for their, career agents or employees or stuff like that. So there you go.
Yeah, what a great deal for Wall Street. What a great deal. They get your money by default. So whose money is it really? Right? If you never see it, I mean, whose money is it? So, and I thought I'd bring up a couple examples of, it's first of all, words matter, right? I love the old Chinese proverb, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper names. Okay. The communists were masters of manipulating language where they would, twist language to change your belief structure, right? And many of the powers that be try to do things, similar things to change the meanings of words, right? So as an example, when your paycheck automatically goes into your bank account, they are legally allowed to call that a deposit. That's what they call it, a deposit. Okay. But that's not what it is, right? When you think of what a deposit is, you think of I'm taking my money and I'm depositing into my account. So it's my money, my account, and the bank is basically custodying my money for me, right? Which, especially when we had the gold standard, that made a lot of sense, right? The bank's providing a service for me, but it's still my money, right?
Right.
Well, that's not the case in the modern banking system. When you make a deposit, quote unquote, what you've actually done is you've made a loan to the bank. When you deposit, quote unquote, your money into the bank, you have actually made an unsecured loan to the bank. It becomes the bank's money, not yours, and they can then loan out $10 for every dollar they have on deposit. So when people talk about the Federal Reserve printing money, they're talking imprecisely. I mean, I know what they mean. They're not wrong. It's just they're speaking in shorthand. What actually goes on usually is the Federal Reserve creates the environment where the member banks can then print money digitally, right? So for every dollar, and of course it's even there's no reserve requirement anymore, so it's even worse. But basically, yeah, not only can they take your money and loan it out, they can counterfeit new, currency units and loan those out as well. So they call it a deposit, which makes people feel warm and fuzzy when you see, a number of the bank account with your name on it. You think it's your money, but it's actually not, right, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. Called fractionalized banking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's also not forget that technically, as you kind of pointed out, the United States government has pretty much nationalized every bank in this country in a way. I mean, with FDIC and all of that. So, during the pandemic, at the beginning of it, a lot of people don't realize that pretty much every bank was on the verge when the government shut down the whole economy. The government was or the banks were on the verge of going under, and the Fed printed pretty much unlimited amounts of money to make sure that they stayed liquid. Well, isn't that technically the nationalization of all of our banks? So when your money goes into a bank account, as I always say, you don't have a contract, right? Money goes into that. Not like a life insurance policy or an annuity where there's actually a legal binding contract. Yeah. I mean, I just,
That's right. Contractual wealth versus statement wealth. That's a whole nother topic.
yeah.
But yeah, so they're allowed to do that. But yet, when we talk about the infinite banking concept and we conceptually talk about building your banking system, right? We get beat up because, after all, Peter, an insurance company is not a bank, right? I get snarky comments like this, right? It's like, well, actually, yeah, I know an insurance company is not literally a bank. Duh. Everybody knows that, right? I know, an insurance policy is not literally a bank account. Yes, duh. Everybody knows that. Obviously, we are talking conceptually. And these people, I don't know if they're deliberately misinterpreting what we're saying, if they just can't think conceptually. And so they think that we are literally saying an insurance policy is a bank. No, it's not. But conceptually speaking, actually, it is very illuminating to refer to this banking process because a whole life insurance policy really works much more the way that a sound bank actually works because your cash value is yours. You have contractually guaranteed rights over it. It has not been loaned out to somebody else, right? And the insurance companies keep more than $1 in reserve for every dollar of liabilities they have in cash value, right? So actually, the way that a properly structured whole life insurance policy works with a good mutual insurance company is more like sound banking conceptually, right? Now we're allowed to call we're required really to call JP Morgan Chase a bank, but it's not really a bank. What they do is more of a legalized counterfeiting enterprise, okay? What these mutual companies do is really more like sound banking, right? So we say something that might be technically imprecise when we refer to this banking process, but conceptually it's 100% true and it's very illuminating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's face a lot of our companies, they're the solvency ratio, which I like to talk about. They got a buck 5 backing up every dollar, buck 10 backing up some companies are over $1.10 backing up every dollar, which means they could literally pay out every single claim or give back every single dollar that they were given, and they'd still have 5, 10, 15 cents on the dollar, you know.
Right. So when we talk about banking, infinite banking, becoming your own banker, we are talking about it in a conceptual sense, hence the infinite banking concept, not the literal infinite bank. Okay. And by way of analogy, some people will say you should have an emergency fund, you should have cash savings as an insurance policy, right? Now, obviously, when they say you should have cash savings, emergency savings as an insurance policy, obviously they don't mean that it's literally an insurance policy where when something goes bad, right, you go and file an insurance claim, right? Obviously, that's not what they mean. Some people will say you should have physical gold, physical silver held outside the banking system, right, as an insurance policy. Obviously, they don't mean a literal insurance policy, right? Where you go and file an insurance claim when something bad happens in the economy, right? That's obviously not what they mean, right? So similarly, I think people, again, I think some of them are kind of deliberately twisting what we're saying, right? And to create the typical straw man argument where they can take it down, because everybody knows a mutually held insurance company is not literally a bank. You don't get a debit card, right, where you can then spend money from your policy, but you can effectively spend money from your policy by way of a policy loan or a surrender, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've accessed my policies uh in the past. It's super easy, you know. Fill out one
Right.
form,
Right.
I have a
And
check.
so I think, the conceptual reality is more important than the technical details on the ground. Okay. The vehicle that we're using is not as important as the strategy for how we're using it, right? As you take I love the analogy of real estate. Take the example of a house, right? A house is a house, okay? But conceptually, what's more important is how are you using the house? If I'm going to buy a house, am I buying it as a place to live in? Or am I buying it as an investment? Right? It's still the same house, but everything about that scenario changes completely if you're just buying a place to live in versus if you're buying a house as an investment, right? And if you're buying a house as an investment, is it going to be a long-term buy and hold rental? Is it going to be a fix and flip, right? Is it going to be part of a BRRRR strategy? I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could do with that house, right? But you can't just say, well, it's a house, so it's all the same. No, but what changes is not the physical thing you're buying. What changes is the strategy you're using for leveraging that asset, right?
Yeah, I
So
mean,
likewise, there are lots of different whole life insurance policies.
yeah,
What's
first thing
important is not the policy itself, but what problem is it solving for you? How are you using it, right?
yeah, one of the first questions I ask when I meet with someone is like, look, you scheduled this meeting with me. What are you looking to accomplish? What would be your definition of a good meeting today? What do you look, and they'll tell you, right? And then I know after I find out what the assets they have, then we can build a strategy that'll be tailored for them. I mean, it's what we got to know. What do they want? Like you said, if you want a rental house could be a lot different than if you want to live there for the next 30 years, right? That's totally different.
Right. And so focusing on the technical details, the legalistic details, is not really very helpful for the average person, right? It's
Yeah.
the conceptual that ultimately
Yeah.
that ultimately matters,
And
right?
I think, Logan, one thing that I think we really needs to get out is I see these posts on LinkedIn or online or whatever, and it's like people anymore have nothing better to do. Their whole idea of a sales concept is go bash another product. I think it is such financial malpractice in a way. It's like, why don't you spend some time actually trying to figure out how to get the American people through probably what's coming down the road, one of the roughest economic, time periods in our history, possibly. I mean, we got all kinds of issues going forward, the national debt, inflation, all of this stuff. And yet they're going to sit there and bash, you know, a life insurance product or cash value life insurance, or you should, all this stuff. It's like, stop. Technically, we shouldn't even have to do a lot of these videos that we do, but we do them because we have to rebuttal the garbage that they're talking about, right? I mean, it just frustrates me to no high end.
Yeah, yeah. And if you want to talk about things that actually need to be criticized, there are much bigger fish than a life insurance policy, right? And it's like, yeah, I could probably find, not properly designed, not properly sold life insurance policies out there. Sure. But that's a tiny little problem relative to all the other things that the banking sector and the financial sector and Wall Street and government are in collusion to do, right? Those are the real problems, right? And the good news is there are alternatives, right? There are alternatives out there once if you know where to look, right?
Right. And it creates confusion, right? And what happens when there's confusion? People don't know who to listen to, and then they end up not taking any action. And that's why we
Mhm.
have so many Americans that are so grossly underinsured. I mean, it's outstanding. It's amazing right now, really, how
Mhm.
underinsured, especially in this high inflationary period. I mean, I would argue it's like well over 90% of all Americans are underinsured.
Yeah, you fully insure your house, you fully insure your car, and yet you're not going to fully insure your life. Most people don't even know what that means. They don't even know what their human life value is. They know what their house is worth, right? They probably have a decent idea what their car is worth, but they don't know their human life value. And one of the most valuable things I do as an agent is when I first meet with someone, I will tell them, here is your insurability. Here is how much death benefit you're eligible for, and explain to them why they should not accept anything less, right? You should, right? Your ability to generate income is the most valuable asset that you have. It's more valuable than your house. It's more valuable than your car. So why don't you fully insure that first with life insurance and disability income insurance, right? But we have it backwards. And I think it's just because people finance the purchase of a car or a house. There are mechanisms in place that basically require you to have insurance, right? Um, whereas people are not required to have life insurance or disability insurance. But really, that's more important, right? You
Right.
you can live, right? You can rent a house, right? And you don't, and depending on where you live, you don't need a car, quite frankly. You could Uber or you could live somewhere where everything's within walking distance, okay? But you, financially speaking, your income, you need that, right?
Right. Yep.
So, yeah, another one that my friend DeAndre Clayton has pointed out is how they are allowed to misrepresent investment vehicles as savings. So when they talk about a retirement account, they will tell you you are saving for retirement. It's like, well, a retirement account is not a savings vehicle. It says very clearly in all caps, all investments carry risk, right?
Yeah.
So you're putting your money into a risky vehicle where all of it, 100% of it, is at risk, right? No matter how conservative your portfolio is, there is risk, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and a lot of people are just programmed to believe that there's no alternative, right? That, well, there's always risk. Well, actually, no, there are things called contractual wealth where rich people keep their money, where they have guarantees. There's a contract that's guaranteeing them something, right? Like an annuity, like whole life insurance, where
Right.
we don't have to take on market risk, right?
But let's remember one thing here. I mean, who's really to blame for a lot of the misconceptions today? And isn't it the government? And here's why. I love to talk about moral hazard. There is literally no moral hazard anymore in this country, right? Because let's just look at Silicon Valley Bank. 90% of all deposits, right, are not insured by FDIC. But yet every single person that had money at Silicon Valley Bank got bailed out. What does that tell everybody? I mean, you know, when we now have a financial crash, right? What does the government immediately do? Print a whole bunch of money, bail everybody out. The airlines during going back to the pandemic, we bailed out all the airlines. What people don't realize is right before that, the airlines were doing stock repurchase plans. They were buying back stock like it was going out of style. Shouldn't the airline industry, which is notorious for having a very cyclical industry, shouldn't they have been stuffing some cash aside to prepare for a rainy day? No, they just bought their stock back, by the way. And by the way, they didn't just buy back their stock. They shredded the stock certificates. Okay. Pretty much we call it helicopter money. Okay. Because remember, there's two ways that a CEO typically gets paid, right? By the price of the stock, the level, and also the earnings per share. What do stock buyback programs instantly do? Artificially inflates the stock price and the earnings per share, right? Because you're eliminating those shares altogether. So this moral hazard thing is really a big deal, Logan. I don't think people realize what this goes totally against Austrian economics, which I know I'm a big fan of, and I know you are as well. And I highly encourage anybody to go onto the Mises Institute website and learn a little bit about Austrian economics. But yeah, moral hazard is gone, and it's really sad.
Yeah, and I think that really a lot of financial principles are ultimately very common sense and very simple. And that's what I try to communicate to people. I don't want to obfuscate by using technical terms, right? I don't want people to think, well, this is too complicated for you. You're too stupid to make your own decisions. You better leave it up to the experts.
Yeah.
No, actually, this is a relatively simple. Doesn't mean easy. Simple doesn't mean easy. And yeah, there is a certain skill to it. There's a certain education that needs to happen, right? But really education is more about unlearning the propaganda that we've been fed, if you will, which is pretty easy to take apart. And so but like we talked about before, when they misrepresent retirement accounts as savings vehicles, you'll meet people where they have a lot of debt, some of it very toxic, and they have very little or no savings, and yet they have a lot of money locked up in retirement account jail, right?
Right.
That's kind of the result of the misuse of this terminology. And of course, the pretty insulting idea that by taking your money from you by default and pushing it into this Wall Street jail, we're helping you, Peter, right? We're helping you by taking your money away from you and
Yeah.
putting it somewhere where we, Wall Street, can profit from it and charge fees on it, right? And that's supposedly helping you, right?
Yeah. And then when we try to get the money out later on, we're going to try to talk you out of taking it out, right?
Yeah, all these things that are supposedly our money. You and I have come across this a lot, Peter, where you try to, if you make the decision to cash out a retirement account like I did and just say, you know what, I'll pay the taxes and penalties. I would rather have access to my money. They do not make it easy for you, right? Even if you want to get money out of a brokerage account, in many cases, they do not make it easy for you. Um, Many financial advisors, I've heard plenty of stories from clients who had financial advisors where they had money not in a retirement account, but in a brokerage account, and they needed the money. They had cancer diagnosis or something happened. They needed to pay for a kid's education, and they needed the money, and they had to fight their financial advisor to get it, right? Even money in a bank account, right?
Yeah.
I've
And I'll,
experienced it multiple times where you try and move sums of money around in a bank, and all of a sudden you find out there's all kinds of limits as to how much you can move, when you can move it, blah, blah, blah. So whose money is it really?
yeah. And by the way, talking about, you mentioned the brokerage account because, I do that stuff as well. And it's actually, if it's set up properly, and that this is all about the control you're talking about. That's why I wanted to mention this. If someone has a brokerage account with me, their bank account is linked to that brokerage account. Like literally the other day, I had a client, I didn't do it. They didn't even reach out to me. They took $2,000 out and moved it into their bank account. Okay. But there's advisors and there's institutions out there that will create roadblocks that can't happen. I mean, I really don't care. It's their money, so they should have access to it, right? But yeah, I
Well,
think that,
actually, Peter, it's not their money. When you purchase a stock, a bond, a mutual fund, a security through your typical brokerage account, it's held in what's called street name, which means you don't own it.
right. They're selling
Fidelity,
shares of
Charles
the
Schwab,
funds.
Robinhood, whoever your custodian so-called is, they actually own it. So again, it's fractional reserve banking applied to the stock market. And guess what they're doing? They're taking your stock and loaning it out to, as an example, a short seller and charging interest on that, right?
Yep.
So once again, it's not your money, it's not your stock, it's not your bond, it's not your mutual fund, and it's not even there. It's been loaned out to somebody else, right? Rehypothecation, all kinds of stuff where they can pyramid more on top. They can also front run the order flow. Robinhood has been notorious for this, where again, hey, Robinhood is free, Peter. It's
Yeah.
free. You can trade stocks all day long and it's free. Isn't that great? They're giving you a free service, right?
Yeah.
But I think that last time I checked, they're making profits. They're not a charitable organization. So
Yeah.
how do they make their money? Well, Robinhood doesn't actually execute those trades. They will take that order flow and they will sell it to, say, Citadel or some other financial institution, who can then front run the order flow. So they get in a bunch of buy orders from Microsoft. Guess what they do? They buy a call option on Microsoft stock. Then they execute those buy orders, driving the price of Microsoft up. Then they sell their call option at a profit, right? So they just skimmed money from, you should have seen the price of Microsoft go up by more, but you didn't, because Citadel skimmed that profit from you, right? And there's lots of different ways that they do this, right?
Well, like, I mean, recently, and look, I use Fidelity as one of my custodians, and they'll probably be mad for me saying this, but I've had a couple situations where Fidelity retirement accounts have been horrible to transfer money out of. I mean, absolutely, it's atrocious. And that's not right. And the Department of Labor wants to come after insurance agents and blah blah blah. What all these federal institutions should be doing is trying to make it easier to do for Americans to do business and to move their money around. If it's actually their money, but half the time, like you say, it's really not their money, right? And I think it's really sad that what it's come
But
down to.
But what are they doing, Peter? It gets back to the average. They take advantage of the average person's obsession with price. So they just drive the price down. Keep driving the price down till it's free, quote unquote. But yet their profits get bigger, right? So if you're obsessed with the price, you're always going to end up getting taken advantage of, because there are plenty of people out there who will offer you stuff for free, quote unquote, or for a very low price. And if that's what you're focused on, that's what you're going to buy, right? That's not how rich people think. Rich people know how to judge value, which is not an easy thing to do, to truly judge the value of an asset, which is different from the price, right? Um,
Right. Yeah. Like,
so I just brought up MF Global. You may remember MF Global. MF Global went bankrupt. Maybe we can dive into this into another conversation, okay? Um, and people who so MF Global was like Fidelity, a custodian, right? And they went bankrupt. And people who thought they had money at MF Global found out the money was not theirs. And they lost a lot of money. Some pretty big names actually lost a lot of money. And guess how many people went to jail for that, Peter?
zero,
Guess how many people were prosecuted for that?
probably zero.
Zero. You know why? They hadn't done anything illegal. Everything they were doing was perfectly legal, right? Because when you put your money with MF Global, it's not your money anymore. It's their money. And they can do whatever they want with their money. If it's their money, there's no legal ramifications if they take it and make, risky bets that don't pan out, and you suffer the consequences, not them, right? They
Yeah.
haven't done anything illegal because it's their money. It's not yours.
Hey, how many people did you hear go to jail for Wells Fargo creating 1.5 million fake accounts?
Yeah, I didn't hear of anyone going to jail. Did they even bring charges against anyone?
I don't think so. I'd have to
They'll
double
probably
check.
find they'll probably find the low level customer service rep and throw
Yeah,
them in jail.
yeah.
Someone who didn't know what was going on, had no idea, was just following orders. They'll throw that person under the
Yeah.
bus, right?
And they fined him the initial fine. Now there's been some additional fines after that, but the first fine was like $1 billion. It was like bad Wells Fargo. Like,
And who's really going to bear the brunt of that fine? It's going to be Wells Fargo's customers ultimately, right? I mean, they're just going to pass on that cost. It's just the cost doing
well, they
business,
already
right?
made more than that on the 1.5 million fake accounts, probably, if you think about it.
Yeah. So if they are not charging you a fee, whether it be Fidelity in your brokerage account, whether it be Wells Fargo in your bank account, then how are they making money? These are profitable institutions, right?
Right.
So yes, whole life insurance, I am proud to say, is a very expensive product. I'm proud to say it. You know why? Because it's an incredibly valuable product.
Absolutely.
I would be suspicious if it wasn't expensive, because I know how ridiculously valuable it is when you know how to design it and leverage it properly, right?
Well, just like I was showing, we're writing some term for a wonderful couple. Big, you know, husband has his own business. They got 5 kids with another one on the way. Wonderful. And but I said, I always like to show where we're writing a couple $1 million a term. But I said, I just want to show you a cash value life insurance policy because we're hopefully we'll be able to convert later on some of this convertible term, right?
Mhm.
And I kid you not, the wife goes to me, she goes, why would anybody buy the other stuff if you could own this? And I said, well, it's a great question. I said, but we also have to take this stuff doesn't buy as much death benefit, of course. But she saw the value of the way it was built and the way it grew over the long term. It was so cool that she said that. I said, that's amazing.
I love that question. I get that question a lot. Once someone really starts to get it, their question is, why isn't everyone doing this?
Right.
Right? Well, why doesn't everyone get wealthy? Everyone would like to be rich. Why don't they get rich?
Yeah.
Right?
When she heard me say at year 20, for example, for every dollar they put in, the insurance company is going to match them dollar for dollar, from the internal growth inside the policy. I like this light bulb went off. And then when I showed him year 30, when it was for every dollar they put in, the insurance company would pretty much give them $2. They were like, come on. I'm like, I'm not kidding.
It does. That's another good question too, because when I first looked into this, and when people also start to get it, they're like, "This is too good to be true. This is too good to be true." And I'm like, "Yeah, it does seem too good to be true, but it's not too good to be true. It's too good to be free. It's too good to
Right.
be free."
Right.
Right?
And because, well, of course, two things, right? One, you got to, as you like to say, you got to season it a little bit. You got to give it time to grow, right?
Hmm.
And two, you got to have the money.
Yep.
Like,
Time and money, right? It costs time and it costs money, just like anything else, right?
right,
There is no free lunch. When you put your money in the bank, it's not free. When you buy and sell stocks with Fidelity, it's not free. When you put your money in a 401k, it's not free. It is not free. The costs
right,
are there. And the biggest costs are the ones that you cannot see, like opportunity cost, right?
right, absolutely. And I think going forward with all the mess that we're in as a country, okay, and I'm not talking about politics. I'm just talking about economic issues, demographic also as well. Having access to your money to take advantage of all this bad stuff coming is going to be huge. Mark my words. You know, we saw it. The Great Depression was a fine example of that. Okay, so
Liquidity, yep. Liquidity, access, and control. Liquidity, access, and
yeah,
control.
yeah,
So, those are just a couple of examples of how um, the powers that be will throw out phrases that are maybe technically, in a legalistic sense, true, but conceptually very misleading. Whereas we will say things that are conceptually true and very illuminating, but may not be technically the most precise things, right? That's because we're trying to educate people, right? We're not trying to, we don't try to separate people from their money or control over their money, right? And we are, perhaps not liked by the powers that be because oftentimes the strategies we're proposing don't as much profit the powers that be, right?
yeah. And here's another thing too: is that not? And we got to wrap this up. But there are agents out there that are inexperienced, or maybe they're not telling people the right stuff. Right? I think you do need to deal with the right insurance professional out there. Okay. So, you want to look to see what they have accomplished, or, a good question I would always recommend is ask them who they were mentored by, right? Like I give you credit, Logan, and that you have multiple people that you've been mentored by. And I give you kudos for that. That's when my career really changed, when I ended up being mentored by who's considerably probably the greatest living life insurance agent out there. So I think that's important too. You don't want to just do this with any Tom, Dick, and Harry out there, right? So I think that's important. And so when they're bashing, they like to bash the industry overall. But I would tell you, there's like 10% of the insurance professionals out there that are absolutely amazing. I really do think they're amazing. But that's the other 90. So you do have to do a little due diligence. Just like if you're having an operation with you know, not to say every surgeon is going to be able to do that surgery as well, right? You probably want the creme de la creme, as I call it. So
The 80-20 rule applies in every industry. In every industry.
Right. Absolutely.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks so much for your time, Peter.
Yeah,
Greatly
absolutely.
appreciate
I
it,
had
and
fun.
we'll do it again soon.